Remember when homecoming dinner was a big deal? Yeah, it was a long time ago. But over time, many of these classic meals have faded into history. Today, I'd like to bring back some of those forgotten homecoming recipes no one makes anymore. Few dishes command attention quite like a well-prepared crown roast. Traditionally served at homecoming dinners and holiday gatherings, it was the kind of dish that made guests stop and admire before the first bite. The ring of bone-in pork chops, arranged in a regal circle, was as much about presentation as it was about flavor. For families looking to impress without breaking the bank, the pork crown roast was a surprisingly economical choice. Pork was, and still is, one of the most affordable meats, and butchers often offered deals on bulk cuts. The apricot glaze, a key feature of this recipe, added just the right balance of sweetness and depth, while a bread-based stuffing packed the center for an even heartier meal. Preparing this dish took skill and patience. The roast had to be properly Frenched, tied, and slow-cooked to achieve that juicy, tender texture. But for many home cooks, the challenge was worth the reward. Unfortunately, as home butchering became a lost art and families shifted toward convenience meals, the crown roast started to disappear from dinner tables. For decades, stuffed bell peppers were a staple of the American dinner table. They were practical, inexpensive, and packed with flavor. Families in the mid-20th century relied on simple, hearty meals, and this dish delivered. With just a few basic ingredients, ground beef, rice, tomatoes, and a well-seasoned filling, home cooks could create a meal that was both satisfying and visually appealing. Peppers were an accessible ingredient, easy to grow in backyard gardens and cheap at the store. Their natural shape made them the perfect edible container, eliminating the need for extra cookware. The filling, often stretched with rice to make the meat go further, was an economical way to feed a large family on a budget. Baked until tender, the peppers absorbed the savory juices, creating a dish that was both rustic and comforting. But as convenience foods took over, stuffed peppers began to fade from dinner rotations. The rise of prepackaged meals and fast food options meant fewer people were willing to spend time hollowing out peppers and slow-baking a homemade filling. Today, the dish still makes an occasional appearance in nostalgic cookbooks, but it's no longer a household staple. Before slow cookers and instant meals, there was fricassee, a dish that turned simple ingredients into something extraordinary. This creamy chicken stew had roots in European cooking, but became a homecoming dinner favorite in American kitchens, especially in the South and Midwest. It was rich, comforting, and made the most of what was available. Chicken fricassee was the perfect example of resourceful cooking. In the days when whole chickens were bought instead of pre-cut parts, every bit was used. The meat was gently simmered in a velvety sauce made from broth, butter, and cream, creating a dish that felt indulgent without being expensive. Paired with dumplings or rice, it was a filling meal that stretched to feed a crowd. What made fricassee special was its balance between rustic and refined. Unlike fried or roasted chicken, this method kept the meat exceptionally tender, absorbing the sauce's deep flavors. Some families added carrots and peas, while others preferred a touch of sherry for extra depth. But no matter the variation, it was a dish meant to be ladled generously and served with warm, crusty bread. So why did it disappear? As boneless, skinless chicken breasts became the norm, slow-cooked dishes like this fell out of favor. Few side dishes could bridge the gap between savory and sweet as effortlessly as corn pudding. A staple of Southern and Midwestern homecoming dinners, this dish combined farm-fresh simplicity with a rich, custard-like texture. Families often served it alongside roasted meats or holiday spreads, where its golden hue and delicate sweetness made it a comforting favorite. Whether fresh off the cob in the summer or canned in colder months, it was inexpensive and widely available. This recipe used basic pantry staples, butter, milk, eggs, and a touch of sugar, to create a dish that felt indulgent despite its humble ingredients. Baking was the preferred method, allowing the custard to set while keeping the kernels tender. Some families swore by a cast-iron skillet, while others used deep casserole dishes to achieve that perfect golden crust. Recipes varied, Some included a splash of vanilla, others added a pinch of nutmeg. But the result was always a creamy, spoonable side that paired with almost anything. As processed cornbread mixes and quick-fix alternatives took over, traditional corn pudding was left behind. But for those who remember its warm, velvety bite, it's a dish worth bringing back. For families stretching their grocery budget, few meals delivered as much flavor and comfort as these unusual-looking meatballs. A product of the Great Depression and wartime rationing, porcupine meatballs were a creative way to make ground beef go further. Mixing rice into the meat wasn't just for texture. It bulked up the meal, making a pound of beef feed more mouths. Rice was an affordable pantry staple, and when the meatballs simmered in a tangy tomato sauce, the grains softened and expanded, giving them their signature spiky appearance. Despite the name, no porcupines were harmed in the making of this dish. Just a bit of kitchen ingenuity at work. Some recipes used canned tomato soup for a mild, creamy sauce, while others relied on crushed tomatoes and Worcestershire sauce for a sharper kick. Either way, the slow cooking process allowed the flavors to meld into a hearty, stick-to-your-ribs meal. For decades, this dish was a go-to for busy home cooks. It was easy, required minimal ingredients, and could be made in one pot, ideal for feeding a growing family. But as convenience foods and pre-made meatballs filled grocery store freezers, the homemade version started to disappear. Some of the best dishes come from necessity, and few ingredients are as dependable as potatoes. For generations, scalloped potatoes were a staple at homecoming dinners, potlucks, and Sunday feasts. Thinly sliced and baked in a rich, velvety sauce, they were a testament to the idea that simple ingredients, when treated right, could feel downright luxurious. Potatoes were the backbone of many American kitchens. They were cheap, easy to store, and could feed an entire family without much effort. The addition of a creamy sauce, made from milk, butter, and a touch of garlic, elevated this humble dish into something special. Some versions kept it simple, while others included layers of cheese, turning it into a gooey, golden masterpiece. Either way, it was a comforting, belly-filling side that paired well with just about any main course. The cooking process required patience. Proper scalloped potatoes weren't rushed. Each layer had to absorb the sauce, and the top needed time to develop that perfect golden crust. But as boxed potato mixes and instant gratins took over, homemade scalloped potatoes started to fade from dinner tables. Slow cooking was once a necessity, not a luxury. Before pressure cookers and pre-packaged meals, tougher cuts of beef were transformed through hours of gentle simmering, unlocking deep, rich flavors. This smoky chipotle beef ragu was one such dish, a meal that took time but rewarded patience with melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. Chipotle peppers, known for their earthy heat, were a staple in traditional Mexican and Southwestern cooking, but by the mid-20th century, their smoky kick found its way into American kitchens. Paired with tomatoes, garlic, and slow-braised beef, this dish delivered a bold, layered flavor that stood apart from ordinary pot roasts. Served over creamy polenta or even buttered noodles, it was both comforting and deeply satisfying. Despite its rich taste, this meal was surprisingly budget-friendly. Beef chuck or brisket, once some of the most affordable cuts, became tender and flavorful when cooked low and slow. The sauce was built from pantry staples, making it an easy, accessible choice for home cooks. But over time, as quick weeknight meals took priority and polenta lost ground to pasta and rice, this dish faded from dinner tables. Today, Chipotle has seen a resurgence in trendy restaurants, but this home-style beef ragu remains a forgotten classic. There was a time when Sunday dinner wasn't complete without a plate of slow-cooked, gravy-drenched pork chops. Smothered in rich, savory onion gravy and served alongside a heaping portion of mashed potatoes, this dish was a cornerstone of Southern home cooking. It was an experience, one that filled the kitchen with the unmistakable aroma of comfort. Pork was an affordable alternative to beef, making it a practical choice for families looking to stretch their grocery budget. Bone-in chops were particularly popular, as they were both flavorful and inexpensive. The slow cooking process allowed even the toughest cuts to become fork tender, absorbing the deep, savory notes of the seasoned gravy. Some cooks swore by a cast iron skillet, while others let the dish simmer in a slow cooker for hours, ensuring the pork melted in your mouth. But as convenience foods and boneless, skinless meats took over the supermarket, this dish began to disappear. Quick-fix dinners replaced slow-simmered meals, and thick homemade gravies gave way to powdered mixes and canned alternatives. Today, smothered pork chops are a rare sight at the dinner table. But for those who remember the first bite of a perfectly tender chop covered in rich, peppery gravy, it's a dish worth revisiting. Bright, tangy, and effortlessly elegant lemon chicken piccata was once a dinner table favorite. With its delicate balance of citrus, butter, and briny capers, this dish turned simple ingredients into something refined. Italian-American families popularized it in mid-century kitchens, and by the 1960s, it had become a go-to recipe for home cooks looking to add a touch of sophistication to a weeknight meal. Chicken was an economical protein, but before boneless, skinless cuts were widely available, whole birds had to be broken down by hand. Piccata was traditionally made with thinly pounded chicken breasts, quickly dredged in flour and sautéed until golden. The sauce was the star, fresh lemon juice and capers combined with a silky butter reduction to create a dish that was light yet deeply flavorful. It was often served with pasta or rice, making it both practical and satisfying. So why did this dish vanish from home kitchens? Over time, complex flavors gave way to simpler, more standardized meals. The rise of processed sauces and pre-made chicken dishes made from scratch piccata seemed like more effort than it was worth. Before plant-based eating became trendy, hearty vegetarian dishes like this one were a practical necessity. Creamy wild rice and mushroom casserole was a staple in Midwestern and Northern kitchens, especially during the colder months. Packed with earthy flavors and a rich, velvety texture, it was a comforting dish that felt just as satisfying as any meat-based meal. Wild rice, despite its name, isn't actually rice. It's a highly nutritious aquatic grain native to North America. Indigenous tribes harvested it for centuries, and by the mid-20th century, it had found its way into everyday cooking. Though slightly more expensive than white rice, its nutty flavor and chewy texture made it worth the price. Combined with mushrooms, one of the most affordable and widely available vegetables, this dish was both economical and deeply flavorful. A creamy sauce, often made with milk, butter, and a touch of sherry, tied everything together, creating a casserole that was rich yet wholesome. As convenience foods surged in popularity, canned cream of anything soup replaced homemade sauces, and wild rice was increasingly swapped for cheaper, quicker cooking grains. Over time, this once-loved casserole became a relic of an era when scratch cooking was the norm. Side dishes were once as thoughtfully prepared as the main course, and few were as simple yet elegant as a well-roasted carrot medley. Coated in honey, butter, and a hint of cinnamon, this dish was a staple at homecoming dinners, adding a touch of natural sweetness to balance out heavier meats and casseroles. Carrots were a practical choice for home cooks. They were cheap, easy to store, and available year-round, making them a kitchen essential. Roasting them brought out their natural sugars, and when paired with honey and warm spices, they became more than just a side dish. They were a highlight. Some versions used maple syrup instead, while others incorporated fresh herbs for a more savory twist. No matter the variation, the result was always a vibrant, glossy medley of tender carrots with a flavor profile that felt both nostalgic and indulgent. As processed vegetable sides and microwave steamed bags took over grocery store shelves, many home cooks stopped roasting vegetables altogether. Instead of taking the time to caramelize their natural flavors, people opted for pre-cut and pre-cooked options. For generations, baked cod was a dependable, no-fuss dinner, particularly in coastal and New England households. Light, flaky, and mild in flavor, cod was one of the most affordable fish available, making it a practical choice for families looking to put a nutritious meal on the table without overspending. Topped with a crisp breadcrumb and herb crust, this dish was both simple and satisfying, proof that great cooking didn't need to be complicated. Cod's popularity was tied to its abundance. Throughout much of the 20th century, fresh or frozen cod was readily available at grocery stores and fish markets, and it didn't require elaborate preparation. A coating of breadcrumbs, butter, and fresh herbs locked in moisture while creating a crunchy golden brown topping. Baked rather than fried, this dish had a lighter texture, making it a favorite among those who wanted something hearty without being heavy. So why did it disappear? Overfishing led to shortages, making cod more expensive, and as frozen fish sticks and pre-breaded fillies flooded supermarkets, many home cooks stopped preparing fish from scratch. Once a staple of working-class kitchens, this hearty one-dish meal was built on the kind of ingredients that stretched a family's budget without sacrificing flavor. Cabbage, potatoes, and smoked sausage, three of the most economical and widely available foods, came together in layers, baked slowly in a rich mustard cream sauce. The result was a rustic, deeply satisfying dish that filled bellies and kept families warm through colder months. Cabbage was a practical ingredient, valued for its long shelf life and versatility. When paired with smoky seasoned sausage and starchy potatoes, it created a meal that was both inexpensive and packed with flavor. The mustard-infused cream sauce added a tangy richness, tying everything together. Some home cooks added a dash of vinegar for brightness, while others incorporated cheese for extra indulgence. No matter the variation, this dish was proof that humble ingredients could create something truly special. Why did it fall out of favor? The rise of prepackaged meals and low-carb trends made cabbage-heavy dishes less common, and as quick stovetop meals replaced slow-baked casseroles, this once popular dish faded from view. Leftover turkey was once the foundation of creative home cooking. Long before frozen dinners and deli slices, resourceful cooks found ways to repurpose every part of a roasted bird. One of the most inventive solutions? A golden, bubbling gratin that transformed shredded turkey into something just as satisfying as the holiday feast itself. Sweet potatoes, naturally rich and slightly sweet, paired perfectly with the savory depth of turkey. Thinly sliced and layered, they acted as both a starch and a built-in flavor enhancer. A cheesy herbed cream sauce seeped into every bite, bringing a velvety richness that made this dish feel indulgent despite its humble origins. Some families added a pinch of nutmeg for warmth, while others topped it with breadcrumbs for a golden, crispy finish. For decades, this dish was a practical way to extend a meal and avoid food waste. Turkey was affordable, especially in the days when whole birds were purchased rather than prepackaged cuts. Sweet potatoes, widely available and inexpensive, provided both nutrition and flavor. As quick-fix meals and processed leftovers became the norm, dishes requiring careful layering and slow baking lost their appeal. For generations, lamb was a prized centerpiece of homecoming feasts and holiday gatherings. Its deep, rich flavor and fall-apart tenderness made it a dish reserved for special occasions, especially in families with European or Mediterranean roots. Slow roasting a lamb shoulder with garlic and fresh herbs was a time-honored tradition. Lamb was once far more common on American dinner tables than it is today. In the early 20th century, it was an affordable alternative to beef and pork, particularly in rural areas where small-scale farming was the norm. Shoulder cuts were especially budget-friendly, benefiting from long, slow cooking to break down tough fibers. Roasted low and slow with rosemary, thyme, and whole cloves of garlic, the meat absorbed deep, aromatic flavors while becoming melt-in-your-mouth tender. So why did it disappear from everyday meals? As industrial farming shifted American preferences toward beef and chicken, lamb fell out of favor. It became harder to find in grocery stores, and for many home cooks, its distinctive flavor was an acquired taste. Faster, more convenient proteins replaced slow-cooked roasts, and over time, this once popular dish faded into obscurity. Once a staple of dinner parties and homecoming feasts, this elegant yet simple side dish was a favorite among home cooks looking to add a touch of sophistication to their meals. Crisp, tender green beans, lightly sautéed in butter and finished with toasted almonds, struck the perfect balance between freshness and richness. Green beans were one of the most accessible vegetables in American kitchens. Whether fresh, frozen, or canned, they were affordable and widely available year-round. Almonds, though slightly more expensive, were used sparingly, adding a crunchy contrast without overwhelming the dish. The preparation was straightforward. The beans were quickly blanched to preserve their bright color and firm texture, then tossed in a buttery skillet with slivered almonds for a nutty, golden brown finish. Some recipes included a squeeze of lemon or a sprinkle of garlic for extra depth. But as convenience cooking took hold, green bean almondine slowly faded from dinner tables. Canned green bean casseroles, loaded with processed ingredients, became the new standard, and simple, fresh preparations were overlooked in favor of heavier, creamier alternatives. Few dishes capture the culinary experimentation of the late 20th century quite like this one. With its bold combination of prunes, olives, capers, and white wine, chicken marbella was a breakout star of the 1980s dinner party scene. It was elegant, unexpected, and a perfect example of how sweet and savory flavors could work together in harmony. The recipe originated from the Silver Palette Cookbook, a landmark 1982 publication that introduced home cooks to sophisticated yet approachable recipes. What set this dish apart was its unique balance: briny olives and capers cut through the sweetness of prunes, while white wine and vinegar created a tangy, aromatic sauce. Chicken, an affordable and versatile protein, absorbed the flavors beautifully as it marinated overnight before baking. Despite its popularity, chicken marbella eventually faded from home kitchens. As the 1990s brought a shift toward faster, simpler meals, dishes requiring overnight marination and complex flavor profiles became less common. The rise of international cuisine also introduced new, trendy flavors that overshadowed this once-beloved classic. A staple of potlucks, homecoming dinners, and weeknight meals, this creamy, cheesy bake was the ultimate comfort food. With its simple ingredients and easy preparation, cheddar broccoli rice bake became a go-to for busy home cooks looking to feed a crowd on a budget. Rice was one of the most affordable pantry staples, stretching meals and adding heartiness without costing much. Broccoli, whether fresh or frozen, provided a touch of green and a hint of nutrition. But the real star was the cheese sauce, a rich, velvety mixture made with cheddar, milk, and often a can of condensed soup for convenience. Some variations added a crunchy topping like buttered breadcrumbs or crushed crackers for an extra layer of texture. This dish thrived in the 1970s and 80s when casseroles dominated American kitchens. But as fresh vegetables and from-scratch cooking made a comeback, cream-based bakes fell out of favor. The rise of quick, microwavable sides also played a role. Why spend time layering and baking when a bag of steamed broccoli and instant rice could be ready in minutes? For those who grew up with its bubbling, cheesy goodness straight from the oven, this classic deserves a second look. Slow cooking was once an art form, and few dishes showcased it better than a well-braised short rib. This was a meal that required patience. Tough cuts of beef transformed into fork-tender perfection after hours of simmering in a rich, aromatic sauce. Deeply savory, fall-off-the-bone ribs were the reward for anyone willing to wait. Short ribs were once considered a budget cut, prized not for their tenderness, but for their flavor when cooked properly. Unlike steaks or roasts, these ribs needed time and care to break down the tough connective tissue. The solution was a slow braise in red wine, broth, and aromatic vegetables. Over several hours, the flavors deepened, and the meat absorbed every note of the wine's richness, creating a dish that was as elegant as it was hearty. For much of the 20th century, this was a homecoming dinner classic, perfect for cold evenings and special occasions. But as cooking habits changed, so did the popularity of slow-braised dishes. People wanted quick meals, not ones that took all afternoon. Short ribs also became more expensive as demand for premium beef cuts soared, making them less common in everyday kitchens. For years, cornbread stuffed pork tenderloin was a homecoming dinner favorite, combining the rich, juicy flavors of pork with the comforting, slightly sweet notes of cornbread dressing. It was the kind of meal that felt celebratory but was made with everyday ingredients. Pork tenderloin was an affordable cut, prized for its tenderness and quick cooking time. Cornbread, a staple in southern and midwestern kitchens, made the perfect stuffing, absorbing the juices from the meat while adding its signature crumbly texture. Sage and dried cranberries brought a hint of warmth and sweetness, making this dish a natural fit for fall and winter gatherings. Some versions included pecans for extra crunch, while others used sausage to double down on the savory depth. So why did this dish fade from dinner tables? As boneless, pre-seasoned pork cuts became common, elaborate stuffed roasts became less appealing to the average home cook. The extra steps of butterflying, filling, and tying up a tenderloin made it feel like a holiday dish rather than a weeknight option. But for those who appreciate the balance of savory pork and buttery cornbread, this is a recipe that deserves a second look, because some traditions are too good to leave behind. Once a humble staple of farmhouse kitchens, savory sweet onion pie was a testament to how simple ingredients could be transformed into something extraordinary. With its flaky crust, velvety custard, and layers of slow caramelized onions, this pie was both comforting and surprisingly elegant, a dish that fit just as well on a holiday table as it did at a casual family dinner. Onions have long been one of the most affordable and widely available vegetables, making them a practical choice for home cooks looking to stretch their budget. When cooked low and slow, their sharp bite mellowed into a deep, natural sweetness. Combined with eggs, cream, and sometimes a sprinkle of cheese, they created a rich, quiche-like filling that was both satisfying and economical. Some versions leaned into the southern tradition of sweet onions, using Vidalias to enhance the dish's natural sugars. So, why did this once popular pie disappear? As savory tarts and quiches became more associated with upscale brunches rather than home-cooked meals, hearty onion-based dishes faded from everyday menus. The rise of pre-made frozen quiches also contributed, making from-scratch versions less common. There was a time when vegetables weren't just steamed and forgotten on the side of the plate. They were the star of the meal. This dish took humble cauliflower and elevated it to something rich, comforting, and undeniably satisfying. Baked in a velvety cheese sauce and topped with golden breadcrumbs, creamy cauliflower gratin was a favorite at homecoming dinners, potlucks, and holiday tables alike. Cauliflower was once an affordable and widely available vegetable, appreciated for its versatility. It absorbed flavors beautifully, making it a natural pairing for creamy, cheesy sauces. The gratin method, borrowed from classic French cooking, ensured that every bite was infused with deep, savory richness. The top layer of breadcrumbs added just the right amount of crunch, creating a contrast that kept each forkful interesting. Some home cooks added a pinch of nutmeg or mustard to enhance the flavor, while others used a mix of cheeses for extra depth. So why did it fade from dinner tables? As frozen and canned vegetables became more common, fresh cauliflower lost its appeal. Many home cooks swapped slow-baked dishes for quicker, less labor-intensive sides, and gratins became associated with special occasions rather than everyday meals. A perfectly roasted chicken was once the ultimate symbol of home cooking. Before rotisserie chickens lined supermarket shelves, families gathered around the table for a golden, crispy-skinned bird fresh from the oven. Coated in a flavorful crust of herbs and breadcrumbs, this dish turned an everyday staple into something worthy of a special occasion. Whole chickens were a budget-friendly choice, stretching across multiple meals. Unlike pre-cut pieces, a whole bird could be roasted, carved, and repurposed into soups or sandwiches, making it a practical investment. The breadcrumb and herb crust added texture and flavor, sealing in juices while creating a beautifully crisp exterior. Traditional blends featured rosemary, thyme, and parsley, but regional variations introduced garlic, lemon zest, or even a hint of paprika for extra depth. Pre-seasoned chicken breasts, boneless cuts, and store-bought rotisserie birds made the slow-roasted whole chicken tradition feel unnecessary. For many, the extra step of trussing, seasoning, and roasting no longer fit into busy weeknight schedules. Yet, for those who remember the aroma of herbs mingling with sizzling chicken fat in a warm oven, there's no substitute. There was a time when meatloaf was a household tradition. Made from simple, inexpensive ingredients, it was a staple of weeknight dinners and homecoming feasts alike. But what made this version special was the glaze. a perfectly balanced mix of ketchup and brown sugar that caramelized into a sticky, flavorful coating as it baked. Ground beef was one of the most affordable proteins, and by mixing it with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, home cooks could stretch a single pound to feed an entire family. Some variations included oats or crushed crackers, while others relied on Worcestershire sauce and mustard for added depth. But the secret weapon was always the glaze, a blend of sweet and tangy flavors that sealed in moisture and gave the loaf its signature glossy finish. So why did this dish start disappearing from dinner tables? As dietary trends shifted, meatloaf's reputation took a hit. Low-carb diets, leaner meat choices, and a move away from home-cooked comfort foods made it less popular. Pre-made frozen meatloaves also contributed, offering convenience at the cost of homemade flavor. For decades, this dish was the definition of hearty, home-cooked comfort food. A cross between a hamburger and a meatloaf, Salisbury steak offered all the savory satisfaction of a beefy main course, without the expense of premium cuts. Smothered in a rich mushroom and onion gravy, it was often served alongside mashed potatoes, soaking up every last drop of its flavorful sauce. The origins of this dish date back to the late 19th century, when Dr. James Salisbury, a physician, promoted chopped beef as a health food. But it wasn't until the mid-20th century that it became a household favorite, especially during the post-war years when ground beef was an affordable, versatile staple. Mixing the meat with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings helped stretch a family's grocery budget, making it a go-to recipe for filling, cost-effective meals. The cooking process was simple yet rewarding. The beef patties were seared to lock in flavor, then simmered slowly in a rich, savory gravy made from beef broth, onions, and mushrooms. The rise of frozen TV dinners turned Salisbury steak into a mass-produced meal, often losing the homemade taste that made it special. Remember when Campbell's cream of mushroom soup and canned tuna were the stars of the food aisle back in the day? Well, Grandma took those humble ingredients and spun them into her classic tuna noodle casserole. During the 1950s and 1960s, convenience foods were all the rage, and tuna noodle casserole fit the bill perfectly. It was a post-World War II creation and was whipped up in no time with ingredients already on hand. Plus, it was a classic comfort food that brought everyone together at Graham's dinner table. During the mid-20th century, tuna noodle casserole was a mainstay in American cookbooks and cooking magazines. It was often featured in advertisements and was promoted as a quick and easy dish for the busy homemaker. This one fell out of flavor, but thanks to the recent revival of noodle dishes, we might see this one back on the menus soon. In the meantime, why not dust off Grandma's old cookbooks and bring it back yourself? Something else that was also insanely popular and stopped being that way was oven-baked chicken drumsticks. This is also something I will entirely, and many food analysts and critics will agree with me on, fast food. See, why would you ever bother with the laborious process of marinating drumsticks, gathering the ingredients, making up a spice blend, making a sauce, making a dip, cutting up fries, and going to the store for some affordable soda when Kentucky Fried Chicken has a deal out for a 3-piece combo for $10? Is $10 outrageous for a 3-piece combo? Most assuredly. Is KFC still undoubtedly delicious, convenient, and deeply ingrained into the American cultural zeitgeist? Absolutely. It's not even that there aren't any benefits to making this stuff at home. There are an insane amount of arguments and good reasons as to why it is healthier, smarter, and more economical to just handle your cravings at home with an air fryer, some olive oil or vegetable oil, and drumsticks you know you can trust. People don't work like that, though. And unfortunately, the saying that humans are creatures of habit couldn't be any more true. People are far too hooked on fast food chains for their supply of fried food, especially classic things like drumsticks. And that just means that ovens don't see a lot of use outside of TikTok trends and one-off videos that content creators might do. Poke cake hit the scene in the 70s and got everyone excited because you could do so much with it. After baking a simple vanilla or chocolate cake, you poke holes all over it and fill those up with Jell-O, pudding, or sweetened condensed milk. This trick lets the filling soak into the cake, making it super moist and adding layers of flavor. Jell-O pushed this idea big time, showing everyone how a plain cake could turn into a showstopper. It was a hit because you could tweak it with different fillings depending on what you were into. But as tastes got more sophisticated and folks leaned towards less sugary stuff, poke cake kind of lost its spotlight. It was usually served in a big dish, looking casual and family-friendly. You'd often see it with a fluffy layer of whipped cream on top, maybe some fruit or sprinkles too, just to make those flavors pop. Vinegar pies shook the baking world up at the start of the 1970s as bakeries started serving the odd pie across the states. Bakers began adding vinegar to the dough whilst also using a vinegar filling, topping it off with whipped cream. Bakeries did this because the vinegar gave the texture of the crust a pretty noticeable glow-up, while also adding a unique tartness to the pie. Usually, apple cider vinegar and brown sugar would be used to balance each other out, and the aroma as well as the set of flavors made this a holiday favorite. Everyone can remember their grandma enthusiastically coming out of the kitchen with a fat vinegar pie on Thanksgiving, right? For Americans who wanted to be whisked away to days when they were 7 and nothing mattered except hearing the school bell ringing, this pie was the one. America found other ways to have nostalgia trips eventually, and vinegar pies are now just a forgotten classic. Leftover turkey in the fridge? Consider it your lucky day because that used to call for Grandma's legendary turkey noodle casserole. This casserole made mornings after Thanksgiving something to look forward to. This was the go-to recipe for using up leftover turkey and noodles after Thanksgiving or Christmas. All Grandma had to do was mix in the ingredients and add a topping made from breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even fried onions. Like most of the casseroles on this list, this was also a one-dish wonder and didn't require much labor. And you know Gram used to be tired from making us a grand feast the night before, so this was an easy way to serve something delicious on the dining table without putting in too much effort. This was a kid-friendly meal that appealed to even the pickiest eaters. What's not to love about a creamy sauce and some noodles all drenched in cheese? So it's pretty much the same deal with chili con carne. It used to be known as chili with meat and was extremely popular in the 70s, but it ran out of luck. Despite how it was used to being known as the quintessential American comfort food, it was just something that stagnated. In Texas and the southwestern areas of the United States, it was arguably the most popular it had ever been. Canned chili brands such as Wolf and Hormel also made it really easy for people to make stuff like this, and you had every beginner-friendly recipe available in cookbooks all over libraries, magazines, shops, and just anywhere, really. Chili con carne, for these reasons, managed to stay pretty relevant despite entering the game fairly late. It evolved into a lot of different variations and styles because not everyone has the South's preference for diarrhea and inflamed mouths, but it was seen as healthy, or at least it had the potential to be. Vegetarians even started pushing their own plant-based substitutes for the meat elements in the dish instead. I think chili bowls and canned chili in general are just falling out, it seems like these days. People go for more tamer flavors. Snowball cakes are all about that winter vibe, with their fluffy marshmallow filling and a coating of shredded coconut that looks just like snow. Inside, there's a chocolate sponge cake that keeps everything rich and interesting. These treats got their name from their cool, snowball-like appearance, making them a hit during the holiday season. They used to be all over the place as pre-packaged snacks from brands like Hostess, known for their fun and distinctive look. But as people started choosing more natural and less processed options, snowball cakes kind of faded out. They were usually wrapped up all neat, making them easy to grab and go. In America, so many communities live together that often one will borrow from another, and such the case with funeral pies. Why do they have such a depressing name? Well, the pie was most often seen at funerals and was given to families as a consolation food. Most people agree that it got its name from how often they were seen at funerals. However, what we do know is that among the Amish community, these were not an omen of a deceased relative, but a sign of a delicious evening. Also, they continued the trend of spices and raisins being used in pies. Funeral pies eventually even made their way to southern USA cuisine, but today, even at a funeral, you would not find this. Next up, we have the shipwreck casserole. If you think this name's creative, keep watching, because some of these casserole names will leave you scratching your head. So, the shipwreck casserole was a go-to for families during tough economic times because it was simple, budget-friendly, and made with ingredients that were often already on hand. The name shipwreck referred to the hodgepodge of ingredients tossed together as if it were a shipwreck of a meal. Grandma's pantry was almost always stocked, but during the hard times, even she had to make do with whatever was available. This delicious casserole was versatile and typically consisted of ground beef, potatoes, onions, and canned tomatoes, with the occasional addition of baked beans or vegetables like carrots and green beans. Speaking of stir-fries, one of the more common ones that wasn't inspired by Asian culture was actually cabbage and sausage stir-fry. And this is definitely something you'd only see in the 70s. First of all, let's be honest. How many Gen Z or Gen Alpha kids do you know that would genuinely ask for cabbage stir-fry for lunch? Uber Eats has the game on deadlock, and that means that people really don't eat stuff like this anymore. Back in the 20th century, though, it was possible for something like cabbage to rise to stardom and even stay at the top and maintain a chokehold on people's diets. Why? Well, that's partially due to the 3-decade-long period filled with 3 history-defining disasters in the 20th century, namely the Depression, the Dust Bowl, and the World Wars. Quite a trifecta, isn't it? Still, that's when cabbage got so popular in America as a cheap and affordable nutrition-filled option that people started to eat it almost non-stop. Adding bits of leftover sausage to the stir-fry gave it a neat little protein element, and that cemented the dish as a rustic 20th century classic for when the going gets noticeably tougher than usual. Back in the late 70s, Jell-O rolled out pudding pops, turning the frozen treat game on its head with something way creamier than the usual ice pops. Made from milk, sugar, and pudding mix, these pops were all about delivering a super smooth, rich taste. At their peak, pudding pops were so popular that they spawned a range of flavors, including chocolate, vanilla, and swirls. They totally stood out, thanks in part to those catchy Bill Cosby ads shouting, "Pudding in a pop." That marketing charm made these treats a big deal in households across the board. But even with their popularity, Kraft decided to cut them from the lineup in the early 2000s. They were trying to slim down their product range. The bright, fun packaging and that quirky non-wood stick are what a lot of folks remember about them. Similar to funeral pies, transparent pies also had a tacky name with incredible flavors. The pie emerged in the 1800s around the northern Kentucky region, where people had very few ingredients for a pie due to financial constraints. Still, the cravings were there, and they needed to be filled, especially if you had kids in the households. So people invented the transparent pie, which used the most bare bones of ingredients like flour, eggs, and butter. Fast forward to the 70s, and the case was still very much the same. Summer vacation, hungry kids, and an empty pantry. So what is a 1970s stay-at-home wife baker to do? Simple. Go for a quick and easy transparent pie which could not fail you, even with the limited ingredients, and whipped cream made this a proper treat. People today definitely could not make a pie out of such little ingredients though, so the pie vanished. So, tamales are a labor of love, but thanks to Grandma, this tamale pie was a much easier way to enjoy the flavors. This casserole caught on like fire in the early 20th century, particularly in the Southwest, where Mexican influence was strong. Just like most casseroles on the list, this one-dish wonder was also a creation of the Depression era. Some versions of this pie started out as a way to use up leftovers, such as bits of meat, vegetables, and even leftover chili. But hey, no one complained because the end result was a delicious dinner. Many families have an heirloom recipe for this casserole passed down from generation to generation. So if this casserole brings back memories from your childhood, it might be time to give Grandma a call. She could be holding on to a secret recipe that she's finally ready to pass down to you. Remember how I said people really became besties with cabbage overall? Yeah, that meant that they were exploring its potential in every avenue of food known to the average American Joe. You had cabbage casseroles, cabbage stir-fries, cabbage stews, and now stuffed cabbage soup. I mean, on the one hand, it was boring as anything could be, and it really needed a lot of aromatics and seasonings to become something you could justify spending time on. On the other hand, it was dirty cheap, like unfairly cheap. And for some people, it was just free. That's right. If you had your own farmland with a crop-growing culture in your family, then you were likely raised growing cabbage or at least having it in the home a lot. In rural areas, low-income ones and urban ones, for different reasons, whether it was the economics of it at all or the fact that modern American consumerism as they knew it was slowly heading to massive health problems for all participants, people flew like moths to cabbage soup. Magic cookie bars got their start from an Eagle brand recipe in the 60s and caught everyone's attention with their awesome taste and texture game. Imagine a buttery graham cracker crust layered with sweetened condensed milk, then piled with chocolate chips, butterscotch chips, coconut, and nuts. It's a chewy, gooey slice of heaven. They were a cinch to whip up and didn't need much time in the oven, which made them a hit for busy bakers and holiday times. Interestingly, they also go by the name Hello Dolly bars in some regions, adding a bit of theatrical flair to their homey appeal. But as years passed and people started leaning towards fresher and less processed goodies, the craze for these bars kind of fizzled. Usually they were cut into squares or bars, rocking a no-fuss, rustic vibe that made them super easy to serve and enjoy. The mix of sweetened condensed milk with coconut and chocolate created a taste that screamed 1970s home baking. Chess pies are similar to both Osgood pies and Jefferson pies, but they leave out the meringue and creamy toppings for an even fundamental flavor profile. Simply put, chess pies are all about taking the basic ingredients that make a pie and nailing them completely. The most liberty this dish takes is some vanilla and tart lemon juice, which we mean, come on, we just talked about literal fried pies. A very do one thing but do it right type of pie. It was an incredible choice for gentlemen who love to go to parlors and pubs for a round of chess. As you can guess, that is also where it got its name because they would order chess pies over a few rounds. Today, both chess pies and the game it gets its identity from are things that were much more popular in the 70s. You can't possibly reminisce about Grandma's forgotten casseroles without bringing up the ham and potato casserole. This one combined two classic comfort foods, ham and potatoes, and instantly became a favorite on the dining table. You know all those leftover ham that goes bad in your refrigerator after the holidays? Well, this recipe was a way to spice it up and turn it into something new, and of course, Grandma did it best. There was even a healthier version of the ham and potato casserole that was made using lean ham, low-fat dairy products, and extra vegetables to boost the nutritional content. Grandma used whatever potatoes she could find at the farmer's market, but this one could be made by a variety. Some recipes called for russets, while others used Yukon Gold or red potatoes, depending on your texture preference. Despite what I just described about the 70s with casserole, you gotta believe me when I say something like zucchini fritters was also at the forefront of the entire decade. That's the thing about the 70s. It's just got so much going on that you can't box it into any single trend or sentiment that was spreading like wildfire. I mean, sure, there was an immense crowd that deeply preferred casserole-style dishes, and they stuck to that belief hardcore, but there was also a big chunk of America that was tired of the high-calorie, high-prep lifestyle of making big dishes that would last you a while. They wanted to switch to greener food that would help keep them lean and food that would also work with the party culture that was getting so popular during the 70s. People wanted bite-sized snacks they could gobble up when they were tipsy at parties, not big banquet dinners they had to sit down for and really make space for. Lots of people were treating eating as an excuse to socialize and go out, instead of finding genuine new food or eating for sustenance like in the first half of the 20th century. The Watergate cake popping up in the 70s was all about riding the wave of the famous scandal it's named after. This pistachio-flavored cake, made with pistachio pudding mix, sports a funky green color and a nutty taste, lightened up with some club soda. It's usually decked out with a frosting that's also got pudding in it and sprinkled with pecans, making for a pretty unique look and texture. The whole novelty of its theme and the connection to a wild moment in politics helped make it a hit. But as people started digging more natural and less artificially flavored sweets, its star faded. Watergate cake was typically a sheet cake, super easy to slice up for casual gatherings. Hawaii has always brought a peculiar taste to any local dish, and chocolate hopia pie is no different. A chocolate pie with a coconut cream frosting topped with whipped cream, giving it a really pretty, milky white appearance. Taste-wise, you had strong waves of chocolate mixed in with perfect little kicks of coconut. Lots of rich whipped cream added the consistency the dish was otherwise missing, and it left the pie with few flaws to speak of. People definitely thought so back then, at least. You could find this in states literally the opposite side of Hawaii, like Ohio and Texas. In chocolate hapia pie, you had something that did not completely disregard standard American tastes, but added a refreshing little something to make it more exciting. Presently, even in Hawaii, this is a rarely made pie as it went out of style. The French also made a significant contribution to delicious casseroles with the easy shepherd's pie. It was a meaty casserole traditionally made with lamb meat. Shepherd's pie has its roots in British cuisine. The name shepherd's pie specifically refers to the use of lamb, while cottage pie is used when beef is the main ingredient. This one was an easy one to make as it didn't require hours of preparation. The dish became popular in the UK during the 19th century, particularly after the introduction of potatoes in the late 18th century. This one was used for meal prep, as it was great for making ahead and freezing. It was known as hachis parmentier in French cuisine, but different countries came up with their own version of the shepherd's pie. In Australia and New Zealand, it's often called cottage pie, and in some places the dish includes sweet potatoes or other unique toppings. Egg group soup is still something you could say is a popular wintertime snack for a lot of people and definitely a comfort food for a niche crowd. But it's not something I would say is in its prime anymore. There were and still are an incredible amount of fans of Chinese cuisine. If anything, that number has only continued to increase with no signs of stopping. I mean, geez, these days we even prefer their TikTok to our own, right? Anyway, that kind of stuff is exactly why egg drop soup got a bit left behind though. You keep getting exposed to a culture over time, and you start to see more and more of it. More traditional recipes, foods, street foods, heritage dishes, all that. You start to leave behind the popular staples that you once went to because you didn't know anything else. It's unfortunately the same deal for things like chow mein and Szechuan chicken, as good as they are. And don't get me wrong, there's a sizable audience for egg drop soup, because who can beat something that simple and effective? I'm just saying that the audience used to be more regular and bigger. Napoleons, or millefeuilles, are these fancy pastries with layers of puff pastry and pastry cream, all topped off with this slick glazed icing. Originating from France in the 18th century and known for their thousand leaves, that's what millefeuille means, these pastries were a big hit in fancy bakeries for their classy look and delicate flavors, perfect for high-end events and fine dining spots. Making them was no small feat, though, and as lighter, simpler desserts became more popular recently, Napoleons started showing up less often. Usually, these pastries were served up in tidy rectangles, with the icing artfully done up to make them total eye candy. The super precise layers and that creamy, flaky vibe are what made munching on a Napoleon feel like a luxury. Green tomato pies might take your taste buds for a spin, since you might have rarely heard of or tried this pie. In reality, though, when made with summertime spices like cloves and cinnamon, they would take on a very fruity taste similar to apples or rhubarbs. In the 70s, green tomato pies were such a chic and in choice as far as your evening dessert plans went. Combined with their apple-like notes, they were called the apple pies of the summer in that decade. The 1970s had a whole spectrum of food, from experimentative train wrecks to simple knockouts. Green tomato pies were somewhere in the middle and did find a fan base, but not one strong enough to last into the new age of today. So, squash might not be our top pick on a regular day, but Grandma's squash casserole was so irresistible that we found ourselves going back for seconds, or even thirds. This casserole was a staple in Southern cuisine and was Gram's favorite way of sneaking nutrients into our dinner. Squash is rich in vitamins A and C, potassium and fiber, making it a wholesome choice. Now, this dish was typically famous in the summer when squash was available in abundance, but you could freeze the veggie and enjoy it all year round too. Squash casserole was highly customizable, meaning Gram could tweak it by adding cooked bacon, sausage, or even fresh herbs. The secret ingredient that gave this bad boy its unique taste was a dash of hot sauce, so next time you attempt making this dish for a potluck, don't forget the key ingredient. Thank me later! You can honestly make the exact same argument, but in a different way, for turkey croquettes. I know you're immediately going to ask what was so special or riveting about croquettes done with turkey instead of the usual chicken. Well, the thing is, it wasn't so much the croquettes as much as it was that this dish showed Americans other avenues for Thanksgiving food. Hey, nothing's replacing the big fat center stage turkey, but people thought that you could also add to the overall vibe and atmosphere of Thanksgiving if you doubled down on the inclination for turkey. They were also a wonderful way to repurpose any sort of leftover turkey, and in an era that was constantly heading towards lighter foods, smaller plates, and overall more greens, they didn't exactly know how to start using their turkey in different ways. Croquettes, on the other hand, were perfect for a few more reasons than just being a different kind of way of using your turkey. You couldn't spend 15-20 minutes making and assembling a turkey sandwich, especially when streaming services weren't a thing. If you missed your TV back then, you could honestly just consider it gone. Turkey croquettes were easy to make ahead of time, and they were a fun way of handling a lot of meat that would otherwise just go to waste sitting in your fridge. Down in Greensboro, North Carolina, Mrs. L.H. Wiggins came up with the hummingbird cake, which Southern Living magazine made famous in '78. This cake's got it all: bananas, pineapple, pecans, cinnamon, and it's topped with a killer cream cheese frosting that ties all those spicy and fruity flavors together. It became a big deal fast, thanks to its unique taste combo and the fact that it was pretty easy to make for any kind of get-together. Over time, though, as dessert trends evolved and global flavors took the spotlight, the hummingbird cake kind of drifted out of the mainstream. The cake is particularly beloved in the South, where it remains a celebrated part of regional culinary traditions. Typically, this cake was stacked up high in layers and generously slathered with frosting, making it a showstopper at parties. Pecans and pies really became a fashionable mix when sawdust pie started moving into bakeries everywhere. Your typical dark forest chocolate cakes and lemon meringues were pushed to the side for a while, especially in the South. Crowds were going crazy for dried fruit pies, especially in the seasons of summer or autumn. Something about falling orange leaves and pecan pies just made so much sense that it was a vibe for that time of the year. Unlike Jefferson pies, which had a whole crew of dried fruits inside, sawdust pies were more focused. Graham crackers and some pecans made for one delicious pie, plus some states like Hawaii like to add coconuts too. Not the most popular of pies on this list, but definitely a top comfort food, at least some odd 50 years ago in the 70s. The Johnny Marzetti casserole? If you grew up in Ohio, I'm sure you've had this beef and macaroni casserole. Now, this casserole was named after a real person. Johnny Marzetti was named after the brother of Teresa Marzetti, an Italian immigrant who opened a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio in 1896. This dish was the restaurant's most popular offering and soon became the talk of the town. In the 1950s and 1960s, Johnny Marzetti was a common item on school lunch menus in the Midwest. That's because of its kid-friendly ingredients. The best part about this one was that it could be made in advance and baked just in time for dinner, which means you didn't have to visit Grandma for this one every time. The key to a good Johnny Marzetti was the cheese blend. It was typically made with a combination of cheddar, provolone, and Parmesan cheese. Another thing that was really exclusive to the 1970s was the country's rediscovered love for casseroles. Things like hot dog casseroles are just proof of this all around. But really, you had a casserole for just about every fruit, ingredient, and meat you had ever heard of. The deal with this one is that it was a cheap casserole and a super beginner-friendly one. Seriously, your nephew could make this if you gave him honest instructions and believed in him enough. I mean, what really is there to do? You just take the pasta and the hot dogs, layer them casserole style, and pop them in the oven. Bam, you're done. And now you have enough food to either share with the family twice over or enough to last you the entire day and then some. Casseroles were super easy to make, convenient, and usually affordable, but could be made with super fancy ingredients if you were feeling like pushing your wallet and could fit just about any taste palette in the entire country. That made them pretty damn hard to beat. Plus, the 70s was known for being a massive return-to-work culture and the grind lifestyle for a lot of Americans, so the need for big, easy, and simple dishes was major. Nowadays, There are a lot of convenient apps and services to do that for you. So there's no need to bother with things like casseroles every other day. Butterscotch brownies, or blondies, mix it up with brown sugar, butter, flour, eggs, and baking powder, all jazzed up with butterscotch chips. These goodies swapped out chocolate for a sweet caramel-like vibe and caught on fast. They were super easy to whip up, making them a go-to for anyone needing a quick dessert fix without the intense richness of chocolate. Their ease of preparation and ability to store well made them popular for potlucks, school functions, and holiday treat exchanges. Over time, though, as bakers got more into gourmet and unique flavors, blondies weren't the main event anymore. Usually, you'd find them cut into squares, laid out on a platter, perfect for grabbing a bite without any fuss. The combo of a chewy middle with a bit of crunch around the edges really made these stand out. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Let us know which one of these specialties you'd like to bring back in the comments below.